Today we're diving into something pretty unique, a personal letter written directly to atheists. It's this really fascinating mix of a raw personal story and a case built on historical arguments. So in this explainer, we're going to unpack how the author tries to connect those two worlds, moving from a private, life-changing experience to a public case for faith. Let's get into it. Right out of the gate, the letter opens with this: Dear Atheists. There's no beating around the bush, no complex introduction. It just immediately sets this really personal, conversational tone, like the author is sitting down to talk to just one person. And that really sets the stage for a very different kind of discussion. And right away, the author makes their goal crystal clear. They state, I'm not here to win an argument. The whole motivation is framed as personal concern. And that's a really crucial move, right? It reframes the entire piece. This isn't meant to be a debate or a confrontation. It's positioned as an invitation. So this really brings us to the heart of what we're looking at. How does someone's own private story, their lived reality, turn into a public message designed to reach others? Well, the source material gives us a pretty clear roadmap, and we're going to follow it, starting with the author's own life. Okay, so the first part of this letter isn't about logic or history. Nope, it's a testimony. The author starts by building their case not on some abstract ideas, but on the foundation of a really profound personal change. To really get the power of this transformation, you have to understand where the author was coming from. The text describes this childhood surrounded by pagan practices, things like tarot cards and spells, but also a life that was really shadowed by domestic violence and abuse. It's a pretty harrowing backstory that sets the stage for a major turning point. The author uses this really powerful metaphor from the Bible to describe how they saw themselves. It gives you this sense of being completely adrift, lost and in desperate need of rescue. What's so interesting here is how it frames what happens next, not as a choice the author made, but as a kind of divine intervention that they received. And this is where it all comes to a head. The author talks about a serious addiction to ecstasy that led to this life-or-death moment, an overdose, in public, while trying to buy a fan during a heat wave, of all things. This is the exact moment where everything changes. In that moment of just pure terror, the author says they cried out these exact words. The text makes it clear this wasn't some thought-out, formal prayer. It was just a gut reaction, a desperate cry for help from deep down, their very first direct appeal to a higher power. And this is the response the author says they heard, a voice delivering this simple, direct command. And the result? Well, the author says they woke up, the effects of the overdose were just gone, and they never touched the drug again. This event is presented as the absolute cornerstone of their newfound faith. Okay, so after laying out that incredibly personal, raw story, the author does a complete 180. The letter shifts from this very subjective experience to objective historical arguments. The goal is to build a case that this belief isn't just emotionally powerful, but that it's also rationally sound. So where do they start? Well, with the most fundamental question you can ask. Before you can even talk about miracles or divinity, the author tackles the basic question of whether Jesus was a real person. The argument here is that among professional historians, this isn't really a serious debate, no matter what their personal beliefs are. And to back this up, the letter points to non-Christian sources. The logic is pretty clever. If neutral or even hostile witnesses from the time confirm Jesus' existence, then that core historical fact is on pretty solid ground. The writings of Josephus, a major Jewish historian, and Tacitus, a Roman senator, are held up as the key pieces of evidence here. All right, so next up, we get this number 24,000. What in the world is that? Well, according to the source, that is the number of ancient manuscript copies of the New Testament that we have today. And that figure is used to argue for the reliability of the text itself. And this comparison really spells out the author's point perfectly. The source puts the manuscript evidence for the New Testament up against other classical works, like Plato's writings, which historians accept without much question. The point they're making is, look, if we accept Plato's work as historically reliable with way fewer copies, then shouldn't the New Testament, with just a mountain of manuscript support, be considered at least as reliable just from a historical document standpoint? Okay, so after tackling the history of the person and the reliability of the documents, the source moves on to the central and, let's be honest, most extraordinary claim of all, the resurrection. This is positioned as the absolute heart of the Christian faith.
So the author builds their case using what are often called minimal facts. These are points that even many skeptical scholars will concede. The logic goes like this. 1. Jesus died by crucifixion. 2. His tomb was empty. 3. A lot of people then claimed they saw him alive. And 4. His followers went from being terrified to being incredibly bold. The argument is that while you might be able to explain away one of these, putting them all together points to one coherent explanation, the resurrection.
And that last point, the transformation of the followers, that's really the linchpin here. The author emphasizes that the early disciples went from hiding in a locked room to going out and proclaiming this message, even when it meant being tortured and killed. This quote sums up the argument perfectly. Their willingness to suffer and die is presented as powerful proof that they genuinely believed what they were saying was true. So that brings us to the final part of the letter. After laying out the personal story and the historical case, the author transitions from making an argument to making an appeal. It's an invitation for the reader to move from just examining the evidence to actually participating. The author then explains the central solution offered by their worldview, something called the New Covenant. It's explained not as a set of rules you have to follow, but as a gift that you just have to accept. It's a promise of salvation, based on faith in Jesus' sacrifice, and it's presented as being freely available to anyone, not something you have to earn. And then it gets super practical. The source literally provides the words for someone to use. This is a direct call to action, offering a simple prayer as a concrete first step for anyone who's been persuaded by the arguments and wants to make that commitment of faith. And here, we come completely full circle. This connects all the history and theology right back to that personal care that was stated at the very beginning. The ultimate motivation, as the author puts it, is a sincere desire to see the reader in heaven. The letter doesn't end with a demand or a command. It ends with a challenge. It's an appeal to intellectual honesty, basically saying that if something is true, it shouldn't be afraid of a little scrutiny. This last line leaves the reader with this really thought-provoking idea, framing the whole letter as an invitation to start their own investigation. It's a powerful way to wrap things up, placing the final decision firmly in the hands of the reader.